Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. The background is a little blurry, but I'm detecting some very cool fandom in the surroundings of the person that I'm talking with, and that is cartoonist creator Dee Fish. Dee, thank you for joining.
Hello. Thank you
Hi.
for having me.
A pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Delighted to be talking about your work. Folks out there will know you for Dandy and Company, Giant Girl Adventures, as well as work in the world of IDW, Image Comics. The Wellkeeper comes to mind, as well as The Apparition. I think those are a few of the titles and projects, if I'm not leaving anything out.
Outside of that, my primary project is Finding D, my current webcomic.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So glad to talk about that as well, and glad to talk about all of the above. I am, of course, curious about what draws you to this world, pardon the pun there, but what draws you to this world of creativity and comics and all of those things of storytelling.
Honestly speaking, I there's no like one impetus thing that I can say this is I don't know any other way to be. Like I've always wanted to tell stories. As 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 soon as I started enjoying stories and figuring out at a very young age that people made these things. Like it was actually the cartoons of Chuck Jones that first made me start going, wait a minute, because I'd
Hmm.
start watching Tom and Jerry cartoons, and then all of a sudden the ones that I really liked that looked sharp and fun, that reminded me of like Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner, said Chuck Jones at the beginning of it. And I started figuring out, wait, that's the same name that shows up on the Grinch. And there were all these different cartoons that had a similar visual style that I was drawn to, and they all had his name on it. And as a little kid watching those cartoons, my brain was kind of like, wait, people make cartoons?
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm a people. And it was the same with like comic strips and comic books. I would read Peanuts in the newspapers and then see the Charlie Brown specials and created and written by Charles M. Schultz, and that's the name on the strip. And in comic books, I was reading like The Amazing Spider-Man, which at the time was being in the early 80s was being drawn by John Romita Jr. And then he moved on to other books, and I liked those books and had his name on it. And ah, similar art. Walter Simonson, when he started drawing the Star Wars comic book, all of a
Hmm.
sudden the Star Wars comic book looked so much better to me, and I was so much more excited for a little. I'm like, and then but I know that name. That's a familiar name, and then I see that name, and slowly but surely, in the late 70s and early 80s, I started figuring out, people make all this stuff. You know, I liked Disney movies, but boy, the ones that started with the name Don Bluth were the ones that I really, really liked.
Hmm.
Not Disney, obviously, but so yeah, once I started figuring out that, and I was already interested in drawing, I was already interested in that. I was hooked from a real early age. It's hard for me to remember a time when I wasn't invested in wanting to tell these stories, to work and draw, to make comics and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's very cool. And I love that age when you start to put those things together. You start to notice the people who are making the comic or the cartoons. I feel like some of the early satires, like the airplane movies, trained me to, and some Mel Brooks trained me to read the credits to be like, what's going to
Yep,
be in there? And then along the way, you notice, oh, there are similar names here. These are human beings like me that are creating things.
yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was all it took for me. I was already, looking at comics and trying to draw them myself and all that jazz. And, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, unlike the other kids, I stayed inside and kept drawing, and they went out into the sun and experienced the world. And I was like, the heck with that. I have paper.
You were imagining the ideal world. You were
I was, yeah,
reflecting
I
on it.
mean, and it was one of those things where it was like every single thing I would watch or absorb, I wanted to do a thing kind of like that. Like I'd,
Hmm.
you know, I'd read comic strips, so I wanted to make a comic strip. I'd watch cartoons, so I'd want to make a cartoon, and I'd read comic books with superheroes, and I'd want to make a comic book with a superhero. And so I mean, that is one of the reasons why, like, I've got, Dandy and Company and Finding D, which are traditional humor style comic strips. I've got The Well Keeper, which is, more lushly drawn fantasy adventure comic, more in the line of like, say, Bone or something like that. I've done Giant Girl Adventure, which is both satire and I mean, I didn't write Giant Girl. That's Sabrina Pandora. That's her she's a friend of mine, and she's the writer on that. We work really close together on that. But
Mhm.
that's a satirical fantasy superhero comic book. It's like scratches so many itches. And Apparition was literally just, that was my teenage angsty superhero book full of rage and muscles and the late 80s, early 90s. So I created that when I was in high school in 1990, rebooted it like in the early 90s as like a little zine. And I republished those about 8 years ago. And I was like, you know what? I'm still kind of proud of this. Let me just tweak it. And this is my stuff. I put it all out there. And as much as I try to get as much done as I can in my day and still have a
Mhm.
job.
Yeah, yeah. Balancing the creative life and all of the things, and you've hat tipped some collaborations there. So I tend to ask about what that process is like, what some of the best collaborations and experiences have been. It sounds like you have a really fertile collaboration with Giant Girl Adventure. So curious about hearing a little more about
That
that.
is that's my biggest collaborative project. I've been friends with Sabrina for years. She kind of held my hand a little bit through the early when I came out as transgender in 2016, and she was very much kind of like a here, I'll show you the ropes a little bit of some of the crap you might want to expect.
Hmm.
And we kind of became friends. We're both into comics, we're both into cartoons, we're both huge Star Trek fans. And she talked me into joining a Star Trek fan writing group, like called a writing sim, where it's almost like role playing without the dice. You come up with a character and you go onto a fictional ship and you write your character. So if the cat, I was writing a character who was at the helm. So if the captain ordered the helm to do something, it was up to me to figure out what that was going to be, and I
Hmm.
would write that bit, and then it would get passed back to another writer, and we worked together on that for a couple of years. Because outside of just drawing, I also like writing, and I was like, it was a neat little fun exercise in strengthening up those muscles. And when that kind of ran its course, we both kind of moved on from that. She had been working on Giant Girl for years before that with another artist who had moved on. And it was during COVID, and I was like, you had all that extra time because you couldn't go anywhere.
Hmm.
So, I started working on the book with her. I started picking up the artist on what was issue 17 of that because it's a web comic, but it's collected into comic book format. And it's an involved process, but we work real close back and forth. She'll hand me the script. I send her blue lines, and we'll do it like this. We'll do it on like Discord, for example, and we'll call it
Hmm.
up, and I'll have my screen up, and I'll be drawing like right here, drawing on the page, and she'll be watching me while I'm drawing, watching what's going on, and think, oh, tweak that, move that how. Ooh, what about this? And I'll be, oh, we should add it. We should add a panel here. That's I've worked with a few writers over the years. I'm currently working on a book with a friend, Paul Iza's book called The Olympian that I'm working on with him. I've worked with Backup Story for the comic book The Perhapanauts, and also the
Hmm.
comic Telos with Todd DeZago, who's I met him at convention years ago, and we're kind of like we kind of became friends, and I'm like, I like your comics, I'll draw some. Um, and I always, with every person I ever work with as a writer, whenever a writer is working to give me the script, I always kind of warn them in advance. I am going to recommend the addition of panels. And they're like, wait, what? Because they're always
Hmm.
expecting the artist to say the opposite. The
Hmm.
artist is always going to go, you don't need 6 panels, 8 panels on this page. Sabrina will give me script, and the page will have 10 panels. And
Hmm.
that page will end up with 13 panels because I'll go, no, 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 we need a beat here. We need a silent moment and an emotional moment and a reaction. And, so I always end up adding panels to things. That's just, it's a visual storytelling thing. I'm like, no, it's gotta flow just right.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's one thing I always warn writers if they're wanting to work with me. I will add stuff to your pages. I'll let you know in advance. I'll tell you what I'm thinking and why. I don't just do it and say take the page.
Hmm.
But I am very much a additive cartoonist in that regard. I'm a more is more cartoonist
That's
when it
cool.
comes
That's cool.
when it comes to storytelling.
Yeah, yeah, and you have that narrative sensibility, and loved what you were saying there about having sort of a partner in the process that also acts as someone that taps into life, that can guide, that can help, and then what an engaging process to hear about with how you work on Discord as well. That's really interesting.
It's fun. It's essentially kind of like, the closest thing, because I live in Pennsylvania, Sabrina's in Texas. We don't live anywhere near each other, but we get to basically hang out a couple times a week and work on stuff and get to have that feeling of having a physical studio, which is like kind of one of those dreams. We're all kind of wanting to have that cool artist hangout studio. I need to do that with I've got some other friends that are kind of like, we should do that sometime. And I'm almost never working when they're working. So it's always kind of hard to line all that up. I got to do that more often because it is a lot of fun to just be like, yeah, let's just, go into Discord and put our screen shares up so we can see what we're drawing. And, you know, there's so many times Sabrina and I will be working and neither of us will talk for like 20 minutes. We're just both doing stuff.
Yeah.
She does these really great customizations. Like she did this one as a present. There's a character in Giant Girl named Lexi the Pixie, and I love drawing Lexi the Pixie. She made this like custom action figure,
Oh,
like
that's
20 different
awesome.
pieces. So she'll be working on these custom action figures, and I'll be working on pages. And sometimes we won't talk for like a half an hour. I'll be like, "We're doing that studio thing. Yeah, it's cool."
Nice, nice.
But
Uh,
I will send her roughs and like when I'm doing Finding D strips, I'll send her the rough. Like, hey, what do you think? It's a way to bounce it off. I don't Drawing comics can very much feel like you live in a bubble, and it's really fun to get out of that bubble and talk to other people.
yeah, yeah. I love a good working relationship or a good personal relationship where pauses are fine. It's okay to pause and just be working
Yeah.
and be living life. Love that. Before we talk more about creative process, favorite Star Trek captain?
Favorite Star Trek captain?
Hmm.
Oh, okay. I'm going to tell you right now. I'm going to preface this before I even answer.
Uh-huh.
There is no such thing when you ask me what's my favorite anything because it
Oh,
changes
yes.
with the wind. It changes with my mood. It changes with versions of those captains over time. Once
Hmm.
upon a time, I could easily say Picard. I Now
Hmm.
I grew up in the 70s, so Kirk is my first captain, technically animated Kirk and then rerun Kirk and then movie Kirk. But
Yes.
I
Uh-huh.
loved Picard until season 2 of Picard.
Right, right. Season
Um,
two. Yes, it's a different one.
season Yeah, I mean there are reasons why they literally make mention of one thing that happened in the entirety of that season throughout all of season 3. They pretend it didn't happen for very good reasons. It was just off the rails. I'm not a new Trek hater. I love me a lot of the new stuff. I liked about 70% of Discovery. I adore
Hmm.
Strange New Worlds and
Hmm.
Lower Decks is my life. Prodigy is great. Currently, my favorite captain is New Pike, is
Nice.
Anson Mount Pike. He has got all the little elements I like, but he is a very distinct character onto himself. He doesn't have the rash impulsiveness that Kirk has, but he's got that charm. I love the way he always I love when there's like something's going down and he doesn't have the answer. He immediately turns to the bridge crew and says options. And everyone throws options and he goes, that's the one. Doesn't care
Yes.
where the idea comes. I love that idea. It's a completely different take on it. But and his performance is just so darn good. That show is charming that is off the charts charming for me. I'm not one of those like continuity where I'm like, it's not canon because the ship looks, oh, they can't make it look like it's 1966 and
Yeah,
do a brand new show that people are going to watch.
true.
I have a model of the new Enterprise up there. I love it. It's gorgeous. Every time they do a ship shot, I'm just like, shipborn, yay! So yeah,
Well,
currently it's Pike.
the Pompadour is absolutely a beautiful thing, as is the musical episode. I really
Oh my
enjoyed
god,
that
I
as
love
well.
that so much. I've got the soundtrack. I play it. I'll sing along to it. I love that they gave Spock a song about loss and longing expressed in algebra.
Yes. Hmm.
They
Hmm.
gave him an algebra song, and it's so perfect. And then like they basically keep Celia Gooding Jr. from singing the entire episode so that at the end they can say, "Oh yeah, by the way, professional singer,"
Yes.
and she can
Yes.
just blow everything out of the water. Because of course Uhura should be the one who wins with song because she sings. Uhura sings. That's always been a defining aspect of her character from the original series, from Charlie X.
Exactly. Exactly. If you were a Star Trek captain, what would be your sort of like that charging statement, the take us out or whatever it happens to be? Because I
It's
love
impossible.
The Spock thing of like I would very much like the ship to go. I think this just it's perfect. It
Now,
works.
my new favorite has to be Ransom and the finale of Lower Deck, Engage the Core,
Uh-huh.
because it's so in character for him. It's so stupid. Um, Probably would just be let's go.
Yeah, I like it. I like
Okay,
it.
okay, let's go.
It's to the point. Love it.
Yep.
Back to the questions of your process. You mentioned Star Trek, so I wanted to throw a few of those things in. Curious about the places you go for creative inspiration, and thinking particularly here about Finding D and what that project is like.
So Finding D, just for the quick thing, is when I came out in 2016, I was still doing Dandy and Company, which is very much like Peanuts meets um, DuckTales meets Looney Tunes, tonally.
Hmm. Hmm.
Very much a wacky comic strip, lots of hijinks, but also like epic adventures. So it'd go into that DuckTale adventure style story. I love that stuff. I love mashing these things up in the narrative. And I was always the supporting character. I was the cartoonist who'd pop in every now and again to argue with the character.
Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
Dandy would come and complain that I'm not drawing him in the strip enough. So I came out in the strip. Like
Yeah.
Dandy came over to complain that he's not in the script. I'm like, I'm not even barely in the next three strips. What's up with that? Uh, what? Like, and so I have to explain to Dandy that I've just come out, what being transgender is, and at the end of the strip, he's like, "Oh, okay. So again, why the hell am I not in the strip?" Like that's his concern.
Hmm.
And I everyone would say to me, "D, you should make a comic about this. You should make a comic about this. You should make a comic about this." Ad nauseum for a year.
Hmm.
I had
Hmm.
started writing a blog called Finding D. I didn't think hard on the name. Trust me, if I thought it would have turned into something, I would have thought harder on the name. I was doing this blog and it was getting really negative. It was first year into this whole process, and I'm focusing on the negative experiences, on the bad stuff that's happening, writing it down and just stewing. I'm not one of
Hmm.
those people where I vent my negativity and it helps me. No, it makes it worse every
Hmm.
time. So I said to myself, okay, well, maybe take their advice. Maybe make this a comic, but make it a comic strip, not some kind of autobiographical, here is my pain and angst, but autobiographical, find the humor, find the punchline. And that was what I was focusing on with make it like a comic strip. Same format as I was doing Dandy, which I kind of set it up as a comic book page, but
Hmm.
it's really a Sunday strip turned on its side, realistically. The way I structure is very much like a Sunday comic strip in the newspaper, just up and down, because
Hmm.
print on demand is a lot easier with comic book format. Um, and I like everything to look the same on the shelf. So I started doing this as a little throwaway web comic. I didn't sit down and do character designs. I didn't plan anything out. I'm just, okay, it's going to be me. It's going to be my partner, Heidi. It's going to be our dog. Go. What
Mhm.
happened that day? Okay, this happened. Okay, make a strip about it. And people just started reacting. People started reacting to that. Oh, and actually, can you
Everything
hear
good?
me?
Yes, you're still
Okay.
on. Yep.
She-Hulk fell over and hit my mute button.
Oh, She-Hulk will do that every time.
Yeah, she's temperamental.
Yeah,
Um, so I started doing these strips and people started responding and I started getting legitimate feedback. People were really enjoying it. People were connecting with it. And over time, though it wasn't the plan, it started turning into my primary strip. I ended up putting Dandy to bed after about almost 20 years or about 20 years of doing it online. I'm like, you know what? I'm running out of steam on it. The characters, I've kind of said everything I need to say with the characters. I put that story officially to bed. I gave it a definitive ending so I could walk away from it and focus my attention on finding Dee a little bit more regularly. And I've been working on that one ever since. And I feel like I wavered really far from the question, but I do that because my brain
perfect.
is a pudding machine.
Yeah, I love to hear the backstory and just the creative decisions of moving from one place to another and how your story, the things you want to explore, informs that. So that's perfect. That's perfect. I was
Yeah.
just asking
But
about sort of that inspiration, and that totally fits.
yeah. As far as a lot of inspiration, I am one of those people where you were pointing out, while a little blurry, I keep stuff like whatever I'm working on, I have stuff that fuels that. Like I've got some bone here because
Hmm.
I love the cartooning of Jeff Smith and all that stuff. One of my favorite comic strips is Rose's Rose. So I have a bunch of Rose's Rose books because I love the cartooning in that. If I
Nice.
reach over to the bookshelf, I've got a lot of Kyle Baker. Kyle Baker, especially Why I Hate Saturn and and when he did The Bakers, huge influence on what I do with Finding D in terms of that sense of real world, but with the sense of touch of humor to it. A lot of Peanuts, Calvin and Hobbes. Within arm's reach, I've got a ton of stuff. I have an iPad, so I'll draw them up here on my computer, but I'll go to the iPad and ink them because it's got a nicer line. And I've got stacks of books in the next to my chair downstairs. So I'll put when I'm inking, I'll put on like Vince Guaraldi Peanut scores because I'm a huge fan of Charlie Brown. Walt Kelly's Pogo. I like to keep all these books real close by. Lynn Johnston, For Better or For Worse, because that is semi-autobiographical, was very much an influence. Yeah, I keep all that stuff nearby and I flip through it regularly to kind of recharge my own batteries. But I'm like that with anything I'm working on. So like when I'm working on like Giant Girl, because it's more serious, straightforward comic books, I'll have some like Art Adams stuff or some
Mhm.
90s Joe Quesada stuff or a lot of 80s Marvel, because that to me was kind of like a peak era of just solid art and great storytelling. And I'll flip through that stuff when I'm working on something a bit more serious and like straightforward for a little bit. I kind of I like to have little things that inspire me and get me in that zone. Movie scores.
Yeah, yeah, love that. So the music plays a role as well.
Oh yeah, I will play by genre and style. Like unless I'm inking, like if I'm inking, I can play any music. I'll put on some They Might Be Giants
Mhm.
or like 80s and 90s Genesis, Billy Joel, whatever. If I'm penciling, writing, whatever, it's all instrumentals. I've got like playlists of all the Star Trek scores from the different movies, like James Horner's Wrath of Khan and all that stuff.
Nice.
Um, and that'll get me through a lot of stuff. Lately, it's been a lot of video game scores from the 90s, like Genesis era stuff, like Sonic the
Hmm.
Hedgehog, Altered Beast, Space Harrier. I just like those little and just listen in the background. Old 80s cartoon music, like the mix of all the background music from like G.I. Joe. That was some
Love
good
it.
stuff.
It is. It is. I love that. I was the Sega Genesis era as well, so I listened to that music a lot just by virtue of
Yep.
playing the games.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I love the steeping yourself in the creativity and all of these inspirations, and indeed being part of that conversation as you are and doing work that's out there that now, I mean, at some point you're going to be on someone else's inspiration stack and probably already are on several.
I've been told I am, and I'm wildly uncomfortable with that idea still. I've been
I
I've been
think
doing
that's
this
good
for a
though.
while, but yeah, I've been doing this for a while now, and yeah, I'm always like, me? What? No, but there's so many other people out there that are so much better at this. And no, I'm still new at this. I'm still a kid, and oh God, I just turned 50. I'm not.
It's part of wearing the role well. That's what it is.
Yep.
Well, if I'm a listener out there and I want to find out more about your work, if I want to dig into your blogging, into Finding D and other things, where are some places I might go to do that?
Well, there is one in order of simplicity, like most of my titles, if you just put .com on the end, that will take you there. So dandyandcompany.com, findingd.com, thewellkeeper.com. I don't think I have apparition, but I don't really do anything with that. But but I do have a hub for everything. It's just Art of Dee Fish. So ARTOFDEEFISH.com. Art of Dee Fish is my kind of main hub, like portfolio page. Um, and that's got pretty much a little bit of everything and linked to everything. So it's got links to Finding D. It has links to Giant Girl. It has for the last couple of years, I've been working on a series because I didn't have enough to do a werewolf novel.
Nice,
I had some
nice.
I had ideas that I knew would take me too long to draw the comic book.
Hmm.
And I have got two novels out. The third one is in editing, and I'm halfway through written on the sixth. So
Cool.
I did go nuts during the pandemic in a lot of directions. And so, you know, not every idea works in its way into one thing or another. And yeah, so novels too. All of that is on the artofdfish.com.
Very, very cool indeed. Well, I love the range of creating. Anything that we missed that we might want to add in before we close out?
Now, I just mentioned the werewolf novels, so that covers that.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. Well, it's been a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed the
Thank you. Thank you.
absolutely, I've enjoyed the art discussion, the cultural references, all the things, and it is an open invitation if you ever want to come back to have a follow-up.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Many, many thanks.